Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the August Language Teachers Forum. Thank you very much for all coming. It's a joint initiative between Griffith University, I'm wearing the shirt today, the coat, and the MLTAQ. So you're very welcome to come. And thanks so much, Clayton, for coming and sharing your wealth of or your research and knowledge with us today. We're looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Sure.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody, and thanks very much, Lee, for having me along this afternoon. I'm currently working at Sommerville House. I work in the languages department. As head of department, we have French, German, Chinese and Japanese there, and I'm very lucky to work with a great group of people. Previously, I've worked in another all-girls school. I've worked in a co-educational environment as well as an all-boys school for the last 20 years, and like many colleagues here. And over that time, I've become interested in different areas, and I've always enjoyed the challenge of applying more general educational issues to my teaching context. So I've become very interested in issues like the application of gender literature to the language classroom. I've also become very interested, obviously, in feedback, which is my topic today, and other areas, for example, language promotion. And I've been thinking of further ways that we can promote languages, and that's something that I'll make mention of in this presentation. It's always fantastic being with colleagues and learning from each other, and it's great that time is allocated for us to have a really good discussion and make meaning of the issues. So the topic of my presentation today is feedback in the languages classroom, a two-way conversation. And when I say a two-way conversation, a conversation between us as teachers and our students. I've always enjoyed this quotation: the great calling is to be a teacher who introduces young people to the pleasure of the rigour of the work. Professor Erica McWilliam from Queensland, who works in a number of capacities in education and who I had the privilege of having as my teacher, and who I've enjoyed listening to over the years. I really feel that that ties in very well with the idea of feedback, because I think the notion of feedback is about introducing students to the pleasure of the rigour of the work. Another quotation that I've always enjoyed is from Milton Berle. I'd rather be a could be if I cannot be an are, because a could be is a maybe who's reaching for a star. I'd rather be a has been than a might have been by far, because a might have been has never been, but a has was once a star. And I think that's all about trying to be better than we were yesterday. And I think feedback plays a very big role in that, in making ourselves better and better. Milton Berle. I used to have that hanging in my classroom and it disappeared, so I'm going to put it back. What is feedback between teachers and students, and why is it important? Feedback, I adopt, and just for a working definition, I adopt a very general definition of feedback within the context of the classroom between teachers and students. And so I mean from the teacher to the student and vice versa. It's the expression of one's perceptions, one's observations, one's ideas about a particular educational situation, about a particular context. And it's often elicited, but not always. And so I'm keeping that very broad because I'm aware that there are lots of types of feedback, as we'll see fairly shortly. Oh, and why is it important? Feedback features in the educational literature quite extensively. I'll be referring to some of that today. Obviously not extensively in the time that we're allotted this afternoon. But for example, Professor John Hattie has included feedback as one of the core components of his framework of visible learning. People like Dr. Carol Dweck from Stanford University, who I'll refer to at a later point, talks about feedback and types of feedback quite explicitly. Feedback is seen in the literature as being essential to a positive and effective learning environment. So in this presentation, I will firstly discuss some theoretical concepts around feedback between students and teachers. So when I say between students and teachers, from teachers to students and vice versa. The presentation is limited to that. And secondly, to present snapshots of some real feedback from the French context, from my teaching context in Year 11 for discussion. The main purpose of the presentation is to stimulate our thinking, my thinking and your thinking about feedback between students and teachers in the languages classroom, because I'm aware that there are people here from many different language teaching contexts, right from primary school right up to tertiary, and there are many issues to discuss, but it's really to stimulate our thinking. The purpose of this presentation is not to present, I guess, a fait accompli of what I do with feedback in my classrooms. I'm going to give you some examples of it. I believe that feedback entails having some, for example, permanent feedback tools that we use on a regular basis to elicit and to give feedback. But I also believe that feedback is a very fluid thing, and that when we're teaching, we see the need at particular times for particular students and particular groups of students to give particular types of feedback. And so I don't think it's something that I can present as being, this is what I do. It's presenting some ideas to you for discussion. Examples of other sources of feedback to teachers and to students. Obviously, parents, particularly in the school context, enjoy giving their feedback, and that can happen at parent-teacher interviews, and that can be elicited, that can be asked for, or it can just be offered. Other students, the whole notion of peer feedback is discussed quite extensively in the literature. Our professional colleagues often give us feedback. I enjoy getting feedback from the colleagues I work with. Senior administration, and often they will give us feedback that a parent has given about feedback that a parent has given them. Hopefully positive feedback, but and also constructive. Resources, for example, software. We've been playing a game called Kahoot on the internet recently, and that gives students some instant feedback. External educational bodies, QCAA, tertiary institutions give us feedback, researchers give us feedback about what's going on, and current trends and so on, and the wider community. I'd like to discuss feedback in the context of three paradigms that have been presented in the literature. Professor Erica McWilliam encourages us to go from Sage on the Stage, which still has, in certain respects, place in our classrooms, to the guide on the side, to what she describes as the meddler in the middle. And I'd like to sort of pause to discuss the role of feedback within those three paradigms. The Sage on the Stage is all about the teacher as expert, the teacher as knowledge expert. And traditionally, the teacher had to have really good knowledge, which I believe they still do, of the content and skills that they're teaching. It really was about the transmission of knowledge, teachers standing up in front of the classroom and transmitting their knowledge to students. It was a very rigorous approach, had a profound technical component and a respect for scholarship. And obviously, when we're giving grammatical explanations to the whole class, that might be described as being the sage on the stage. Then we move to the paradigm of the guide on the side. And academics and other people working in the field are often quite cynical about this approach. And this is where there seemed to be a notion that no matter how much, it was really seen as being good to give students as much positive feedback as possible. The whole notion of praise was about telling students how great they were. And often we praised students for their qualities. We told them that they were very intelligent, however you define that. We told them that they were a very talented language learner. And it was thought that the more positive feedback you gave to students, the higher their self-esteem and the greater their outcomes. And it's been shown in the literature, and Professor McWilliam talks about this, that nothing could be further from the truth, that it can actually be very damaging, that sort of approach. Teaching was seen as therapeutics. We'd sort of stand on the sidelines and say, that's great, even if it kind of wasn't. And we just hoped that they'd do better next time. Teacher as whisperer and counsellor, worksheet rich and challenge poor, and does not support stickability or perseverance in the learning process. Then we turn to, so the guide on the side, the feedback was really about, saying as many great things as possible. The medal in the middle is all about recognising the messiness of learning. And I think this fits in very, very well with languages. It's all about involving students in all of the problems of learning and teaching all of the time. And the teacher is seen more as co-editor and co-creator. We're working alongside students. We're solving problems alongside students. We're giving them problems to solve. It's seriously playful. It has low threat but high challenge. There's an emphasis on design and creativity, and the teacher is seen as a pedagogical expert, but not necessarily all the time as knowledge expert. I think they both have their place. Students look to us as role models of language learning. French is my teaching area, but French is my second language, English is my native language, and I'd like to think that students would look to me as a role model as a French learner. But I don't know everything. I can't possibly know everything. I don't know every single word, so I'll often point students in the right direction, ask them to look things up and report back to the class. I think that paradigm fits in very, very well with languages because students are constantly creating and we're creating alongside them. And so feedback surely in this paradigm, in this way of thinking, should take the form of helping students through the messiness of learning and really recognising that learning is stimulating, but learning's also sometimes very tough. And I think that really sums up language learning very, very well. I was talking to Year 9s yesterday in subject selection, and I was saying, here's the reality of language learning. But if you jump in head first and you see learning as being sometimes a rough journey, and sometimes you feel success and sometimes you feel frustration, at the end of it, you'll be a better person because of it. Examples of feedback tools in the literature, and I won't go into these in a lot of depth. Obviously, student to teacher, we look at surveys, feedback from students to teachers, surveys, questionnaires, one-word summaries at the end of the lesson, asking them to sum up the lesson in one word and then explain it, and maybe think about it, and for homework, writing an explanation for that word. Student-teacher conferences, I'm going to show you a student-teacher conference, a video later on in the presentation. Incidental feedback, parent-teacher interviews, self-reflections, and then feedback from teachers to students, obviously reports, very good feedback, parent-teacher interviews, incidental feedback, feedback on written work, and prompts, asking questions to prompt their thinking. Feedback between teachers and students in the literature. Professor John Hattie in Visible Learning talks about this in quite a lot of depth. And he says that for feedback to be effective, we need learning intentions, we need good goals that are shared, we need knowledge of prior achievement. Students need knowledge of their own prior achievement in order to move forward. A transparent and understood criteria of success amongst our students, and commitments to goals and success criteria. John Hattie then goes on to say that feedback models need dimensions of focus. So the student's saying, where am I going? How am I going there? Where to next? Effect, so looking at task, looking at the particular task that they're carried out. Self-regulation, which is all about how they the attitudes that they are adopting in carrying out particular tasks and how that can be regulated, and also focusing on self. Propensity, factoring in the types of learner. Obviously, feedback needs to take account of things like sensitivities of the students, the age of the students, the cultural background of students, because we want the students to read our feedback the way we intend. Some guidelines then for teacher to student feedback. Shute talks about focusing feedback on the task, not the learner. And I think what's meant by that is that we're not talking about the type of person that they are, we're talking about their relationship with the task. Providing elaborated feedback, what, how, why. Presenting feedback in manageable units. Being specific and clear, keeping feedback as simple as possible, but no simpler. Reducing uncertainty between performance and goals. And it's important that we're focusing on the process of learning in all of this. Giving unbiased objective feedback, promoting a learning goal orientation via feedback, and welcoming errors. Provide feedback after learners have attempted a solution, so as a follow-up. In the second language learning and teaching literature, focus on form features quite extensively. It's summed up in How Languages Are Learnt, Lightbone and Sparta, but authors such as Ellis and Doty and others have talked about the notion of focusing on grammatical items, for example. And it's been said in the literature, for example, Ellis talks about the importance of focusing on form in a communicative context. And so that obviously has implications for our feedback and error correction, something that we need to take account of. Gender and feedback. Gender is an issue that I'm very interested in. Dr. Leonard Sachs is one of the world leaders in talking about gender in a number of areas, and he discusses in his book Why Gender Matters. He talks in part of that about teaching and learning, and Dr. Sachs presents a lot of, and he's got a very interesting website if you want to go on and have a look, but he presents a lot of really interesting neurological research and the differences between the male brain and the female brain at different stages of life. And he quotes very extensive research that points to the fact that in girls, say young girls, say from about ages 11 and 12 onwards, connections are starting to be formed between the amygdala, which is the part in the base part of the brain that has to do with particularly with negative emotions, and the prefrontal cortex, which is where language is stored, things like consequences, actions taken after certain emotions are felt, and so forth. Whereas in the male brain, those connections occur a lot later. So Dr. Sachs discusses that, and this is quite extensive research he quotes, and he says that has a lot of implications when we're asking young people to articulate their feelings, particularly, or their observations. And he's saying, for example, whilst we can't stereotype, we can't say girls do this and boys do that, we can't do that. But we need to take account of the fact that girls might be more likely are able to articulate their feelings about a particular situation in class or about how they're going in their work, whereas boys might need other methods to express themselves in that way. It's a fascinating reading, and there's more and more literature being written about gender and learning. And there's also a number of other implications for learning. In some co-educational schools in the United States, they're now for certain classes separating girls from boys for that reason, because it's said that they learn differently. And I think that this is something that we need to take account of when we're asking young people to reflect on their learning and to articulate their learning. These are all research topics, I think, for further development. Feedback between teachers and students in the literature. What do teachers do with feedback received by students? How do we make meaning of this? Surely we don't need to take account of everything that students say. And surely sometimes we need to ask for elaboration and we need to make meaning of this feedback. I had a very quirky Year 12 student a number of years ago who I used to take pride in wearing this tie that had fruit on it, and it was a very, very colourful tie. I really liked it. And this student actually, I knew her very well and understood that she was having a bit of a joke, but I had a feedback system, and at the end of it she wrote, "Can you please wear a different tie?" And then she gave me a tie, not this one, but a very plain tie when she was leaving school to say thank you and have a lovely holiday. And it said, could you please accept this tie? I'll give it to you on the condition that you wear it instead of wearing that other fruit tie. So that feedback, I liked that tie, so I didn't take account of her feedback. I kept wearing it, whether she liked it or whether my students liked it or not. Some things we need to take on board, and other things we say, well, I'm sorry, I can't show you videos all of the time. Thanks for your feedback, but that's not what learning is about. How much teacher feedback is actually received by our students, and how this is read by our students? How are they reading? Are they reading it in the same way as we intend it to be read? How is the teacher perceived? Have students correctly understood the feedback, and how have they applied this to their learning? They're questions that John Hattie raises. The number of times that I've given feedback to a student and I walk away and I think, all of these questions come to my mind. I think I'm doing a great job because I'm giving them this feedback, but is it actually being effective? Rationale for feedback to student to teacher. Cook Sather in 2002 wrote, "Because of who we are, what we know and how we're positioned, we need to authorise students' perspectives by changing the participant structures as well as the participants in policy making and practice shaping conversations about education." She argues in a very interesting article, I've got references there at the end, that students need to be have a much greater role in the educational process. And as I'll argue later on, I argue that it doesn't take away one little bit any teacher authority. It just changes the participant structures. Another thing that I think we really need to be aware of in providing feedback and also eliciting feedback from students, but particularly providing feedback to students, is take account of Carol Dweck's fixed versus growth mindset. And just briefly, the fixed mindset sees people as being born with a certain ability and a certain intelligence, and other people as being born with less intelligence or less ability, and there's nothing that we can do about that. And I really think that this is a big issue for language teaching and learning. I think there's a myth that, without trying to sound negative, I think there's a myth still out there that you're either good at learning a language or you're not, And if you're not, nothing much can be done about it. I've heard parents say to me, look, I tried to learn French for 5 years and I don't speak a word of it. I failed terribly. I don't know where my daughter gets it from because she seems to be doing really well. And I wonder how to what extent these myths perpetuate themselves. And that's something that I addressed in subject selection talks recently with students, is this idea that we need to foster a growth mindset where intelligence can be developed, ability can be developed through the right efforts and strategies. It is true in the language learning and teaching literature, Lightbone and Sparta talk about it quite extensively, where they say that aptitude is a factor in language learning success, along with things like motivation, along with instruction, and along with a number of other factors. But aptitude plays a part, but it only plays a small part, I believe. I believe that a large part of success in language teaching and learning, success in learning a language, is efforts and strategies and the approach that one takes. And I believe that we need to foster a culture of students understanding that your language learning ability can be developed. Our brains have an extraordinary capacity for storing languages, and I think that that is an issue that has implications for language promotion. I'll talk about that later on. Fixed versus growth mindset. Fixed mindset says that students avoid challenges. They get defensive, they give up easily, they see effort as fruitless, they ignore useful negative feedback, and they feel threatened by the success of others. Whereas a growth mindset, it embraces challenges, it persists after setbacks, it sees effort as the path to mastery, it learns from criticism, and it finds lessons and inspiration in the success of others. And after reading Dweck, I saw this on Facebook and I copied it. If somebody offers you an amazing opportunity but you're not sure you can do it, say yes, then learn how to do it later. I think that's a prime example of growth mindset. I don't know a lot about Richard Branson, but Carol Dweck in her book Mindset analyses a number of chief executive officers and concludes that the success or otherwise of their companies depends on the growth-mindedness or the fixed-mindedness of the CEO. And there's been some quite big studies conducted around that. And she talks about companies that have been very successful and then looks at some of the approaches of the CEO. She said CEOs who listen to feedback, who learn from failures, who change their tack, are likely to be more successful. CEOs who see failure as a reflection of their own ability, or who are really quite one-minded about things, are bound to fail. As I say, I don't know much about Richard Branson's approach, but I think that really stuck with me. I've just put together these notes. A growth-minded student sees a disappointing grade as a challenge to do better next time, as hard as that is. Carol Dweck says this is not easy, by the way. Tries hard all or most of the time, listens to and heeds teacher advice, and sees learning as a journey with highs and lows, exciting parts and disappointments. Perseveres, talks with the teacher about how to do better next time, and gives it a go at the risk of making mistakes. I can think of a number of my students who are in that category who say, look, I'll give it a go. I'm not sure how to do this. And then I say, well, I'll help you through it. Carol Dweck says, for all of our students, set the bar really high and show them how to get there. Teachers with a growth mindset, and I believe, by the way, that to foster a really great culture of feedback, teacher to student and student to teacher feedback, we need to have a growth mindset amongst our students and also amongst our teachers. The literature talks about, and there's more and more literature being written about growth mindset in teachers, and particularly beginner teachers. Teachers with a growth mindset believe that no matter how much natural ability you may have, you can always find important ways to improve your practice. Every teacher, no matter who they are, can significantly improve their teaching ability, and the value of trying new teaching methods outweighs the risk of making a mistake. That it is important to discuss problems in classroom teaching with others in order to learn from them. So the next pre-service teacher I supervise, I'm going to put the emphasis on her growth mindset and my growth mindset, because I want the both of us to learn together. And I think that's growth mindset in action. That's always difficult when we get a criticism, and we all do, from a student or a teacher, and we see that as a reflection of our ability as a teacher. The number of times I've driven home thinking, I'm no good at this. Adopting a growth mindset is difficult. Teacher to student feedback. Carol Dweck says that children do better at school when given feedback about efforts and strategies rather than intelligence or talent. For starters, I'd love to know definitions of intelligence. That's very problematic. And how do we define talent? That's also very problematic. But effort and strategies is a very interesting concept. Carol Dweck herself has conducted some major studies where she's compared groups of students performing the same task, and one group, for example, was praised for intelligence and talent, and the other group was given feedback about their efforts and strategies and their approaches and suggestions for doing better next time. And Carol Dweck made a number of conclusions. The first was that the group that was praised for intelligence and talent was less likely to try challenges, became less resilient than the other group, and was less likely to try new things, because they thought, if I fail, then that'll be a reflection. I've already been called intelligent, and that'll be a reflection of my intelligence. So I'm not going to try. I've already been called intelligent. Whereas the group that was praised and given feedback on efforts and strategies was more likely to try new things, to learn from failures, to see failure as an opportunity to make progress. So what I did a few years ago, I did a presentation about feedback, but I developed it for today, is I wrote to a number of French teaching colleagues in schools who teach senior French, so I limited it to that, and I said, would you mind taking the names out? Would you mind sending me some feedback on written work that you've given your students? And I chose one teacher's feedback, and I present to you two examples of what feedback that teacher gave to students. You have obviously made excellent efforts in this task. This is on draft writing. You have made improvement on the last task. You have used a much wider range of vocabulary relevant to the topic this time. You seem to be using much more language we've learnt rather than translating from English. That's an issue that I have in my classes as well. The accuracy of your language has consequently increased, and your work is more easily understood. You should review your notes on the subjunctive, que je puisse, which is very, very difficult. Given the level you have achieved, you might attempt to use even more language in future tasks. And second bit of feedback on a different type of writing. This is a satisfactory piece of writing. There is room for you to increase the quality of your writing, and you should aim to increase your efforts in this very doable goal. Try to learn longer chunks of language from the texts we've studied rather than translating from English. Take greater care with past participles with irregular verbs. J'ai eu, j'ai vu, j'ai bu. Have you tried to use vocabulary cards to study at home? You might also benefit from testing yourself in revision time. Once you've done this for a couple of weeks, hand in another example to me of your writing and we'll see how much you've improved. I chose those because they best matched a growth mindset and talking about efforts and strategies. And it's not about who the student is, but it's about what the student is doing and what the student needs to do. Examples of student to teacher feedback. I might just go to the back of the room because I'll need to click on these. These are actually from my own classroom. And last year I collected these from my Year 11 students. What I do from lesson to lesson is I have a sheet of feedback for each student, and they complete, and it only takes them about a minute, sometimes it takes them 30 seconds, to fill in one square, so that's a page of A4, one square per lesson. And there are 2 focus questions there. What worked for you this lesson? Please be specific. And what didn't work? And try to be as specific as possible. And my focus there is on the task, and it's a self-reflection thing. I noticed John Hattie talks about that as being one of the dimensions, is that self-reflection. And it's double-sided, and what I do is once both sides are filled up, I transfer them to electronic files and I recycle the paper, and we move on to a next page. And then what I do is I often regularly read through those examples of feedback and try to document the needs of each student. And sometimes I go back to each student later on and say, look, I'm trying to work out a way to help you here, and I'd like to discuss that with you. So below there are some real examples from students with their names taken off, and I have their permissions. So what worked for you this lesson? This particular student says identifying verbs, tenses and conjugations from mock orals. We call them mock orals, where they're having conversations in front of the class and we gave them feedback. They volunteered to do that. It really aids my listening skills, which need improving. What didn't work, I find all quite helpful, but I would like to do more tenses in the past, imparfait, and plus que parfait. With that particular student, I might just note down, I might, if it's a recurring theme amongst many students, I might do a whole class activity. I try to respond as best I can to that feedback. And just for some further examples, what worked for you this lesson? I like how we went through responses in detail and they were written on the board, which was very helpful. When we were reading Le Silence de la Mer, the people that were reading, the stronger French speakers, spoke very fast and it was hard to keep up and follow along. I think that's really interesting. I think that's very rich feedback that informs my teaching. There's no feedback in there that I think, oh well, I'm not going to take account of that later on. This particular student enjoyed the group interaction and the verb practice, but speaking all in French, she's asked, and this was a particularly strong student, I'd prefer if we all spoke just in French, even when we talk about what we will do in the lessons. Obviously, use of the L2 and the L1 features quite highly in the literature. But that particular student is a very advanced student, so I've got to find ways of challenging her. She obviously wants more challenge, and I think would benefit from more challenge. The list of verbs was very helpful, and the poems were interesting. The verb speaking activity worked better in groups. We did an activity where the students, I wrote up a number of verbs that we covered, and their challenge was to try to include as many verbs as possible. And I called on some volunteers in the class after group work, and they preferred doing that in the groups. What worked for you this lesson? Reading text given to us, new conjugations and vocab, group discussion. They all seem to enjoy group activities. I think it was Jane Crawford in a really interesting article wrote, students much prefer most of the time to work with each other than to work with the teacher, so let's not downplay group work. The activity to pick out others' verb grammar when they were out the front, I don't feel I gained much from it. It's better to do partner work. And finally, just one more, this particular student, listening to mock orals and writing sentence ideas and structures on the board were what worked for her. What didn't work was sometimes listening to the book. Can get a bit tedious as we spend a long time reading it today. All right. Now just moving on, I'd like to play you a conference that I had with one particular student in my Year 11 class. That was at the end of last semester. At the end of each semester, I don't do this any more than this, but at the end of each semester I have a conference with each student, and it's quite a relaxed conference, and I ask them how they're feeling about their learning, and it's very, very qualitative. It's just really for them to have an open-ended discussion about how things are going, and I try to ask questions to elicit further information from them. I might give them some feedback along the way. I also ask for their feedback, and it's a really good, I think, a really good goal-setting exercise for me and for the students. Just some ethical and other issues around this. This student is aware, and her parents have given permission for me to use this conference today for this purpose, on the basis that obviously her name was taken out of it, and but she is a Year 11 student, and also I just some other issues there. I like to reassure the students that, you know, this is for the purpose of moving their learning forward, and that I like to reassure them that honesty is very important, honest feedback. Obviously there are some limitations around exercises like this. You know, students mightn't be totally telling the whole truth or totally expressing how they feel because they're worried that they might offend us or something like that. So we just need to be aware of those issues. So I'll play you the student conference. It goes for about 8 minutes, I think, and I'm sure that the sound will work.
All right, well thanks very much for talking about your French with me today. And just firstly, how have you felt about your progress in Year 11 French so far, being the end of semester 1?
Yeah, I think I'm doing well. I think I've improved a lot from last year, particularly in the 4 different elements that we focused on. I've really improved, which is good, I guess. Yeah.
And what do you think the area is that you've improved in the most?
Definitely writing. Writing I've really improved, and I think I've really found different ways where I can improve and make sure like I'm ready for each piece of assessment and how best to tackle the different elements when I'm preparing that.
Mm-hmm. And how have you gone about revising, for example, for reading, for writing?
So for writing, I've written out lots of different sentences, put them into paragraphs, and then just really practice writing them, making sure all the grammar, all the sentences make sense and all that. And I had a fairly good idea of the topics we were going to cover. So I had a rough idea of what sentences I needed to know in that, and then just memorising those.
Sure, and those sentences, did they come from materials that we'd studied in class?
Yeah, so lots of them were based off materials we'd studied, sentences that were written up on the whiteboard and that. So I sort of picked and chose what I liked, and then just putting them into paragraphs, adding in a sentence here and there so it all links and makes sense.
Right, that sounds like a really active, really efficient way to revise.
Yeah.
And what about the other areas? What about your speaking? I noticed you did very well in your recent speaking test.
Yeah, I did well in the speaking. Sort of the same thing I think for the speaking and the writing, I just tend to put them into like, I write it down and then I practice writing it and saying it at the same time. So the same sort of process I did for the speaking as well. But then just practicing the speaking and sort of changing it up a bit and then just improv a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And how did you find that spontaneous element of speaking?
I thought it was alright. Yeah, I think just like with practice and that, and then like when you do different speaking activities in class, that really helps. Just with the spontaneous side of it. But I thought that was alright. Yeah.
Sure. And just looking for the moment about at the activities that we did in class and all
Yeah.
the learning experiences and just reflecting on those, what activities stand out in your mind as being, I guess, the most beneficial for you?
Yeah. I really like doing the ones where like we have the text and then we sort of bring out the different sentences we like. And also the ones where we have to like write our own scripts. So you're sort of taking the sentences you know and then putting them into different like paragraphs and that and making sense of what we're learning. So it's not just like a sentence, like it means something. I find those really helpful. So all like the different group activities where we work in like pairs with other people we don't normally work with. I really like those.
So you like working with different people in the class, not the same?
Yeah, I think mixing it up, it's a bit more interesting because well, sometimes you get like a little off topic, but it's like someone new. And I think it's really nice, like our French class, there's lots of like, I think we're all like friends more or less. And so you kind of like chat with the other person, like you might not necessarily be talking about exactly what you're meant to be doing at that moment, but you might be talking about something else in French. So you can sort of like have a conversation in French and improve like the spontaneous side, but also like still be doing the work. And then like hearing other people's ideas and how they tackle it and write it and that.
Sure. And what about grammatical concepts? I mean, you've been talking about a lot about the communicative side, about communicating and using sentences in context. What about really grasping those grammatical concepts?
Yeah, they're like really important. I think sometimes I struggle with the different conjugations of the verbs and everything. But I think maybe like a little more focus on the grammatical things would help. But I think they're pretty good. We do a bit of work with them, which is good.
So a bit more focus on grammar.
Yeah.
Do you have any other ideas about for activities and learning experiences that might help you? I mean, obviously you're a very, very high achiever.
Yeah.
But obviously you want to become, I guess, more advanced and more complex in your language.
Improve.
What sort of things could help you to move forward?
Well, I always found, well, I wasn't a huge fan of them at the time. Like the different tests when you focus on like one form of verb and then do the test. I think that could really help. Like if you just did like a test a week and we had like a verb and like mix it up a bit, just to sort of get that consolidation on them all. Because I think that's an area, particularly when like you're doing the group work and you're talking with other people, the verbs is an area which I think lots of people struggle with. And well, I know I struggle with that a lot. And just like changing in the different tenses as well. Yeah, and I think because we do so many lessons a week, like in the younger grades, I think it was a bit harder to do. So you've only got like 1 or 2 lessons a week. Whereas now we've got like 4 a week. So we can like practice like throughout the week, like just maybe say them at the beginning of the lesson, write them out on a board, and then do like a test on Friday or on a Monday after the weekend and that.
Sure. That sounds like a really useful activity, and I'll definitely look at incorporating those. Do you have what about oral activities, for example?
Yeah.
You know, group work.
I think we're all like very chatty. Maybe we could do some. Maybe just like some more like spontaneous conversations at the beginning of class. Be like, okay, so talk to the person about your weekend or what you're going to be doing on the weekend and that sort of thing. Because that would improve the spontaneous side, but also just like the back and forth talking.
Sure. because it's that spontaneous, that spontaneity that's really important, as well as you say, the focus on grammar.
And like, well, I guess especially when it comes to like speaking and that, like I think lots of us are fine with just saying what we've learned, but then it's that spontaneous side which really throws it off, and it's the difference in the grades and that. But I think if we did practice on that, that would really improve us all.
Sure. And what about the receptive skills, the comprehension, the reading and listening?
Yeah.
How do you feel about those, and what can help you to move forward?
Well, I think when we get given the text and we go through them as a class, I find those really helpful, and when we get a copy so we can have a look over it, I think that's really good. Maybe one thing, particularly with the unit for smoking, some of the texts were like really hard spell sections, like I sort of got the grasp but didn't quite understand. But maybe like with those complex ones, I think they're good because like you can really understand. Like it really improves your vocab and everything. But maybe doing like, I know we went to like translate, but like sort of like an outline of like what paragraphs are about. So you sort of get like the gist of maybe going over like vocab we don't really understand and then like using it. And the other thing is like, well, so we do French. So then like maybe speaking more in French and like giving us instructions in French. And then if the class doesn't understand, then explaining in English. Because like you do it sometimes and it's really good. But then
But do it more.
Yeah.
Would help you.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay, do you have any other ideas?
No, I think I really like French. It's fun, and I learn a lot with the way you teach, so it's good.
That's great. That's great. Well, as I say, your French is very advanced, and you're really moving forward very fast and making great progress. And I think you're a very active learner, meaning that you revise. You seem to revise very actively, and in class you're very active as well with your French. So that's excellent. And I really value your ideas and your feedback. So thanks very much.
Thank you. Oh, and one other thing, I really like the whiteboard activities. They're fun.
Oh, that's great. That's great. They're the ones where we
do the whiteboard and test and that's fun.
Sure.
I like those.
That's great. Yeah, I'm glad.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Whiteboard. That the whiteboards that she was referring to I bought, I think, from EDSCO. I don't have shares in EDSCO, by the way, so it's not a deliberate advertisement, but I bought these small whiteboards where it was really a vocabulary test, so I'd say a word and they'd have to write it and they'd hold it up and I'd say non and oui if it was perfect, non if it was anything less than perfect. And if I said non, they had to put it down and they had a whiteboard marker and then they'd have to have another go. And they really like that instant feedback. So that's what this particular student was referring to. I was going to say I really enjoy that type of that data. I like to conduct those conferences as a type of a semi-structured interview where I ask a few leading questions or a few sort of main questions to get the student talking, and then once the student begins talking, then I ask for clarification or I'll put something else in for them to comment on. And I really enjoy it when the student feels at ease. They don't feel threatened by it. So there's all the issues around that. They need to speak freely. I felt that in this particular conference, this student was speaking quite freely and gave some really interesting ideas. So it's very, very rich data, I think, for me to reflect on as a teacher. Just some further thoughts. Getting back to this idea of implications for languages promotion, I think the strategies for languages promotion still very much apply today. When we talk about the cognitive benefits of learning a language, we talk about career benefits. We say that learning a language is really good for your brain, which is true. There's a lot of research around that. We also talk about, interpersonal skills. We talk about a number of advantages. I really feel that we could go a little bit further in terms of language promotion and promote a language as getting back to the whole growth mindset concept, as being a journey that students embark upon, and they become better learners and they become more resilient as a result. Now, I know that that's probably said. I think that could be said more explicitly, to parents, that the role of the teacher is to help the students and to advise the students along the way. But this is a fascinating journey. It's stimulating. It's rocky. It's sometimes they enjoy success, sometimes they don't, and they learn from failures. And at the end of it, they become better people because of it. I think that has a place in languages promotion. Also, with regards to teachers' authority, I've often heard it said that we're letting the students, dictate, if you like, what we do. That's not the case at all, I think, with feedback and eliciting feedback and listening to students. They're not telling us what to do, they're just giving their feedback about the learning situation, and they're reflecting on their own learning as well. It's a little bit like going to the doctor when the doctor asks what a particular strategy the doctor is using is working, and if the doctor needs to change tack in his or her treatment of us. And so I don't think that the teacher's authority has been diminished. Students look to us as the authority in the classroom, I believe. I believe that students look to the teacher as being the one in charge, the one who's organised, the one who leads, the one who advises. Students very much look to teachers for that. So I would argue that in eliciting student feedback and reflecting on that feedback doesn't diminish our authority as the adult in the room, and I'm talking to school teachers here, tertiary academics. You're not the only adult in the room, but at schools we are the only adult in the room. Doesn't diminish our authority one little bit. The challenge for us is to find a variety of feedback tools and methods that are relevant to our classes of students. I made a point in not being too, prescriptive in this presentation of presenting feedback methods, because I do, as I say, think that it depends on the class, it depends on the students, and it depends on their needs. Creating a climate of great feedback. That's a challenge for us in talking to students about feedback, in talking to students about growth mindset. I think that's another challenge for us. And valuing feedback. Parent-teacher interviews, I'm not sure how you as my colleagues feel about this. I really enjoy when the student comes to parent-teacher interview. And I say, and I know it differs amongst colleagues, I say to students, can you please come along to the parent-teacher interview, because I really like to start with them and start with, how are you feeling about your French, and getting that started. I used to, when I was a beginner teacher, I'd have all my notes and I'd read from my script to the parents, and at the end of it they'd say, oh great, thanks very much. I think it's great to start with the student and start with their feedback, and then we can get into it from there. So I think it has implications for parent-teacher interviews. Some conclusions. Obviously, feedback is a powerful tool for language teaching and learning. We're really the meddlers in the middle in this whole exciting journey. Great feedback can create and add to a positive and effective learning and teaching environment. I believe it allows us to be on the same page, so to speak, as our students, and having that really good communication. Much work is obviously yet to be done in the area of effective feedback amongst teachers and students in the languages classroom, and I think this is it's a really good opportunity to have a really good discussion about feedback in different contexts. So I've come in at just over an hour. I have a list of references that I'm happy to send out to you there, and thank you so much for coming and for inviting me along, Lee, and really look forward to discussing the issues with you. And also, just an invitation, please, if you'd like to send me an email and with feedback, but also not just feedback, but also having these discussions and talking about pedagogical problems together, I think is great.